All right, we are live. Hey, everybody, welcome to Geeky Dads Talk About Geeky Things. And tonight I have Ted Atchley joining me. If you are watching this live here on Substack, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, the next day, Ted is a former guest of the original podcast. He and I talked about a lot of different things when he came on. I think you were on what, like 3 or 4 times, if I remember
At
correct.
least, at least, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, Ted, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, and we'll get into chatting about tonight.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a software developer by day, and by night, I'm a fantasy and sci-fi author. Got a couple of short stories that are available on my website. I've been working on a fantasy story that I've kind of been shopping around a little bit, trying to decide, what I'm going to do with that. Um, and yeah, it's really fun. I've been working on a short story. It's kind of a prequel to that novel that should be ready, another month or so that I'm going to get out on my website. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. Now, you were also a part of the Eon City anthology, part one, and of
Yes.
course we have part two coming out
Okay.
that we are hard at work on right now. We are still in the early stages of writing that, but we've had, oh man, 7, 8 meetings, I think, on that book and that anthology that will come to Kickstarter in September, I believe. So anyway, so I was trying to
That was a lot of
remember.
fun.
Yeah, so yeah, it's this next edition of Eon City Anthology. It's actually going to be set like 1 year after the original events in that first anthology. So that's kind of exciting. But yeah, I was trying to remember I when I first met you, and it was and I couldn't remember if it was 2019 or 2021 because 2020 the Railmakers conference was virtual,
Yep.
and but it was 2019, and I remember it because I don't think I met you until like the last day. And the only reason I met you is because you had the coolest costume. And I think, did you win that year for the costume? I
I
think you did.
did. I did win
Yeah,
that year. Yes.
yeah, and it was it was the Leroy Jenkins costume. Now, that I think all of us Gen X guys and maybe some of the older millennials are the ones that really understood the reference of that costume. Um, but man, was that okay? Let's go ahead and tell the story about what that's all about. As far as
Okay.
the
So yes, become a meme, but there was a video game, World of Warcraft, and this was
yeah,
early on in World of Warcraft's run. This was the original, what's now called vanilla World of Warcraft. And there was a particular raid, uh, and there was a particular room that had all these eggs in it. And so Leroy Jenkins is a paladin, and I loved Leroy Jenkins because I played paladins my whole time in WoW. I really love that heroic fantasy of the paladin. It's just my favorite thing to play in any kind of game that I'm doing. And so, it's a little bit like a D&D session as they're getting ready to go into this room because they're trying to, right, well, you're going to go over here and you're going to do this. And I guess Leroy wasn't real good at, waiting for them to kind of divulge the plan. So he runs in, guns blazing, not guns, because of course,
yeah.
swords and shields, and shouts his now famous battle cry of Leroy Jenkins. And the raid leader is just like, stick to the plan, stick to the plan. Now, if you go find this on YouTube, you can find
Yeah.
the clip of this. I should warn that not all of the language is safe for work, shall we say?
Yeah.
There are a couple of as Spock would say, colorful metaphors that are employed.
Nice. Nice. Yeah. That. Yeah. I remember when I first saw that, and I wasn't a big World of Warcraft guy myself, but I always thought that was awesome. I thought that was funny, and then when you showed up with that costume in 2019, I was just like, all right, I gotta be friends with this guy. He's
Awesome.
totally a Gen X dad. I can already tell. And
Yep. Yep.
yeah, so all right, so we got a few people over here watching. We got Alicia, Murray, and Andrew Swearigan, former guest of this show as well. He and I were doing the 1980s movie series on the original podcast back in the day. So, um, when I think about it, because storytelling. Okay, so let's back up. Most of us, you know, especially us Gen Xer dads, you know, our first gaming systems were like Atari and NES.
Yep.
And with NES, it was like you had Super Mario Brothers. But for me, I remember when Zelda came out, the gold cartridge Zelda. And that was the
Yep.
first time I like got invested into the storytelling within video games itself, because that was the first video game you could like save your progress. It was like so cool that you could do that. And I became a fan of Zelda and still play it to this day, all the new ones that come out. But I don't know. I think it's evolved over the years. What was your sort of your experience when it comes to storytelling and video games? Because this is like a serious like genre now. It's a new genre of writing, really. And we saw it last year at the conference and expo, Realm Makers conference and expo, when we had the Christian game developers come and you know do their conference. But uh, video game development is not just developing the video games; it's the story. And sometimes when I go to play a game nowadays, I'm more invested in the story. What's your experience? What's your history with video games and storytelling?
Yeah. So like like a lot of Gen Xers, I started on the Atari, and the story there was little more than shoot the aliens, save the
Yeah.
princess, you know, um, or survive to the end of the jungle, Harry, or
Yeah.
is his name? Yeah,
Did you
you
ever
know,
do any of the Easter eggs to try and find the creators? Like, because on Atari they weren't giving credits to the
right.
developers, and so they would hide these Easter eggs. Did you ever do any of that? Like, try and find the Easter eggs to find out who the creator was within the game?
Yeah, so there we had this ancient technology, and as Gen Xers prior to the internet, it was called a magazine, and so there was actually I can't remember which magazine it was, but there was a magazine that kind of had some of those secrets. But that's the only way I generally found them. But I went from Atari, and then I kind of got really into PC gaming
Mm.
with things like Curse of the Azure Bonds, which was it was a D&D, one of the first D&D games. And I remember because I gamed a lot because my home life wasn't ideal. So I would just, I'd close myself in my room and I would play games. And I remember bursting out of my room um, early in high school or maybe middle school to tell, like, I beat the fire elemental. I beat the fire elemental. And my whole what? Just
Yeah.
but I guess Curse was one of the first PC games that I played because it had that D&D backbone to it that really had the story of it. Pools of Radiance was another one. Um, and then did you ever play the Lucas games like Curse of Monkey Island or Grim Fandango?
I played Curse of Monkey Island. That was the
Okay,
only one I did.
yeah, and that kind of brought in not only the story but a great bit of humor into the
Hmm.
game. So I was more going on the PC route. I got my NES and in college, and didn't do a lot of the story things besides Zelda. I was actually more of a Tecmo Bowl guy. We actually my whole dorm we had a Tecmo Bowl league in my dorm, and we would play and um, play keep records and stuff. It was kind of crazy, but and then once I got out on my own, I was back into the PC thing, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter.
Hmm.
Like I was in one of the most elite X-Wing versus TIE Fighter squadrons. Not a lot of story in that game, but that led me into probably what I would argue is the greatest story game ever made, and that's Knights of the Old Republic.
Mm,
Like that game's story, the twist in that game story, which is pretty well known, it's like, 20 some odd years old, probably older than that. It's pretty well known now. But the first time I played through that, and my jaw just hitting the floor like, wait, no, what just happened? And really starting to care about those characters like you might care about characters in a
yeah.
movie or in a book. I mean, it was wild. That game and Baldur's Gate as well, the original Baldur's Gate, again, got those D&D kind of bones to it. But so those were kind of where I went into the story games.
Yeah. I played Knights of the Old Republic too, and they're coming out with they haven't said it's a direct tie-in or a direct sequel, but they're coming out with a new Star Wars game here pretty soon, and we'll get back into some Star Wars stuff here in a little bit. Um, but yeah, that was one of the games that I played as well. I didn't play a lot of Baldur's Gate. I've never really played Baldur's Gate. Um, I was always more of a Nintendo guy anyway, but I did play a lot of Final Fantasy. Was the
Yep.
game that I played. And then of course, what really got me invested, I think it was about, I think it came out in 2010, 2011, but that was Skyrim.
Oh
And,
yeah.
uh, and
Yep.
so I went back probably 2 years ago and I downloaded it uh, on the Switch. And what I like about the Switch version is they actually have the Master Sword from Zelda and the Hyrule Shield hidden up on one of the
Oh.
main mountains, and you got to find. Yeah, you can find it, and that became one of my
Okay.
favorite weapons. But I think what I like about Skyrim and why I think it still holds up is you can play. There's different variations. I mean, there's a civil war going on, and you can choose which side of the civil war you're going to be on,
Mhm.
and then you can choose which guild you're going to be a part of, what character you're going to be. I was always like to play like that Conan esque type of character, like that barbarian that's just like
Yeah.
the murder hobo that's just going from town to town, just sort of looting and doing all those things. But I think in one version, my character adopted kids, and I mean, and I bought a house and like started a farm and things like that. But there were so many things you could
Garden the
do with
garden.
it. Yeah, and yeah, Gardener Gardens, ES Diamante, and who's going to be at Realmakers by the way this year, and
Oh,
just
cool.
he just did a video for me. Steve Raza, um, was doing a book signing, and him and Steve got together, and Zach agreed to do some promo video for us that we'll be releasing here pretty soon through some Railmakers reels and stuff. But yeah, Skyrim was that one that there's so many different side quests you can do that
Hmm.
I would just and I that's my favorite type of gaming is the open world concept type games, which I
Yeah.
think is why I fell in love with Zelda to begin with. So, are you more of one of those that likes to do like I know there's the Elden Ring and Sanderson plays a lot of that. I
Okay.
never really got into that. Did you ever get into that? Any of those?
I didn't get into Elden Ring. What I think is so interesting about games, especially if it comes to storytelling, is like I see it kind of as a continuum. Like you have movies, right? And
Yeah,
movies, you are very passive. You're sitting back. You are watching what's going on. And then games, especially story-driven games, you're active, you're involved, and a lot of times the ending of the game will depend on the choices that you made throughout the game. BioWare was great with doing this with their games. There was a or if you ever played BioShock, like
yeah, yeah.
um, yeah, like what happened to the sisters in BioShock
Hmm.
depended on your choices during the game. So you had more agency. And then I think so there's movies, then there's games, but games still can't quite deliver the only thing that ever delivers the experience, I think, of really going into the soul of a character is a book.
Yeah,
So I kind of rank them that way, like it's movies, then games, but then books, because in books you become that person. You feel what they're feeling and you experience it through their eyes. And there's just, yeah, you don't have the same ability to like make the choices, but you experience the character on such a deeper level there in the book versus the game. So that's just kind of how I look at them.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay. Obviously, you played a lot of Baldur's Gate.
Hmm.
I think the games for me recently have been probably Breath of the Wild and Tears of
Oh
the Kingdom, both Zelda games. But I've always been more partial to Breath of the Wild. I mean,
yeah.
Tears of the Kingdom was great. Um, I don't know. There's just something special about Breath of the Wild. I think that just opened up the story and the world in a different way that I really enjoyed. I mean, it's like, the entire world is like an apocalyptic world because Link is just waking up,
Hmm.
and I found that concept interesting because it was a different take. And I think what one of the things, like, video games, they're almost like RPGs in a way, in some sense. I mean, you're leveling up your skills and all those different types of things. So it's for me, it's always been that one-on-one time where I can just take the evening at like 9 o'clock after the kids have gone to bed. Of course, my kids are now teenagers, so they're staying up until like 11 or 12 anymore. And so at least that's how I looked at it. So for me, like I said, it was Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom recently. What are some of the ones, like the video games, that have good stories that you've recently played that, yeah, you probably keep coming back to? What let's break that up into two questions. What are some games you keep coming back to regardless of if they're new or not? And what are some new ones that you've recently played?
Yeah. Lately, most of my gaming time has been devoted to things I can play on the couch with my son.
Mm,
He's a teenager now, and so I've tried to really hone my gaming time into things that we can do together to give us things that we can talk about. And so, we do a lot of Smash and a lot of Mario Kart and
yeah.
those kind of things. The really cool things we found on his Switch, like um, we could get all the retro games. Like there's an area on his Switch to go back, and so we played Double Dragon or we played the original Street Fighter or something. He's really into
Contra.
fighting games. Yeah,
Yeah,
Contra.
Contra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just wild to like, and to see him, like he enjoys these games that are 20, 30 years old. It's like they're just fun. I think the game that I always keep coming back to is my World of Warcraft. Um,
Mm,
and it's got that story element to it, but it's also got kind of that open world to it, and it's also got a social aspect to it because you're dealing with other humans throughout the world. Sometimes I wish I didn't, but it's kind of interesting in that it's been going on for so little bit of a comic book story, and that it's gotten really convoluted, and heroes have become villains, and you've got you know guys that oh yeah, well he used to be this, and now he's fallen, but now he's been redeemed, or she, or so it's just the story's really gotten kind of wild, and I think they're trying to kind of wrap it up now with Midnight, and I can't remember the one that comes after that right now, but trying to put a little bit of a bow on it, kind of almost do an NCU style reset on it.
yeah. Yeah, you were talking about Techno Bowl earlier. My son was actually playing that the other day.
Nice.
But my kids are the same way. I I got the whole thing where we downloaded the old games, the classic games, the one because you
Right.
could get the NES games and then you can get the Super Nintendo games on the Switch.
Yep.
And what's interesting is to see their same reaction is the same reaction I have. So like they started out on Super Mario Brothers. That is where I
Hmm.
started them with video games. Now
Yep.
they're into things like Minecraft and stuff like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and they outbuild me all the time and and all that stuff. But it's interesting when they get the Super Mario Brother 2 and they're just like, "Dad, this stinks. This isn't any fun. This isn't Mario." And I'm like, "Holy smokes, that's the exact same reaction I had as a
Yeah.
kid."
Right.
And and then we get into Contra and stuff like that, and I'm disappointed because I still remember the code and it doesn't work,
Right,
anymore.
right, right.
You can't get in there and use that down, down, up, up, left, right. Was it BA select start or whatever it is?
Yep,
You
yep, yep.
Now you can't use that anymore. And I'm like, I was telling them all about this code, and I tried it like 6 or 7 times. They're like, Dad, I don't think that ever happened. So they'll start gaslighting me and stuff like that. But to me, just to see the reaction that they have to the same type of games and the same type of story. But my kids are the same way. Like they love Mario and
Hmm.
Smash. We love playing Smash and we love playing Mario Kart and things like that. And they love going back to the older games and playing stuff. Like I said the other day, he was playing the Techno Ball. I came in, I'm just like, all I hear, I'm getting a glass of water, and all I hear is hut 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 hut
Yeah,
hut
yeah,
hut.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm like,
Yep.
I was like, that's Techno Ball. What are you doing
Right.
playing without me? So, but I think it's one of those things where those type of games I think really sort of, I don't want to say they stand the test of time, but there's something special about them because those are the games we grew up on, and those are the games that
Yep.
we want to share with our kids as well. But we want them to experience a lot of new games. Like my kids are into Minecraft, and
Yeah, yeah.
I'll
Very
be
good.
honest with you. Our friend Josh Smith has a YouTube channel, Mr. Disco Man. Go out there and watch it. And
Hmm.
his YouTube channel is nothing but Minecraft.
Yeah.
And I just didn't get it. I'll be honest with you. When I first started playing, I'm like, what is this? And maybe that was, the Gen X tag coming out of me, and I'm like, oh man, I am
Hmm.
old. But or maybe it was just the fact that it took me a while to understand it, and it took me a while to
Yep.
really get what all this stuff was. But yeah, we love getting in there and playing and building and creating our own worlds and things like that, and creating our own stories within the worlds.
Right.
That to me is the fun spot when it comes to gaming and things like that, and the storytelling aspect. Is sometimes these games you can get in there and you know sort of create your own story. So if I was ask you like your favorite arcade type game with a story, mine was Street Fighter. I was a big
Okay. Yep.
Street Fighter fan. What was yours?
Yeah, I was a huge Street Fighter. I spent a lot of time um, on Street Fighter. The rule of the quarter on top of the right there. I was a Blanca main for the most part. I loved Blanca. Did a little bit of E Honda too, but yeah, that was really cool. I love, there weren't a ton of like story driven games, but
Yeah.
then I got into some of the other ones like when they came out with Marvel versus Street Fighter, and I
Mm,
think that was the one that had Thanos the Infinity Gauntlet.
yeah.
That was really cool the way they incorporated those powers. But I was going to ask you, do you know, speaking of Super Mario 2, do you know the story of why that game was like that? Did you heard the backstory on that?
I've heard the backstory. From what I understand,
Okay.
they didn't expect Mario to be well. I mean, they expected to be popular, but they didn't expect people to like expect a second one to come out. And
Right.
supposedly there was like this other game that had like
Hmm.
vegetables and stuff like that. And
Yep.
they were like farming and things like that. And they're just like, okay, why don't we just take Mario and stick him in this game?
Yep.
And they released it. And I remember when it came out, we went to the store the day it came
Yep.
out and got the game. And I got
Yes.
home and I started playing it and I'm like, what is this? And it had the weird music and the quicksand and all that stuff. And I'm just like, but yeah, once I didn't hear the story until probably years later. Like,
Sure.
I mean, I think I had kids before I heard the story, and I'm like, that's why that game stunk. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but as far as I mean, we would go. So when I was in, I guess, middle school or maybe early high school, like we would go every Sunday to the arcade. We used to have an Aladdin's Castle, and so um, we would play Punch Out.
mm,
That was a really fun game. Centipede and one called Zax. I think it was called Zaxxon or Zaxxon. I can't remember. Defender was a great one. Some of these would eventually later on get ported to consoles. But there was, especially like with Street Fighter and its successor, Street Fighter versus Marvel, Street Fighter versus Capcom, or X-Men, was it X-Men versus Street Fighter?
Yeah, X-Men was a
Yeah,
good one.
and it became a social thing there in the arcade. And as a guy who struggled socially, it was nice to, I don't know if you remember it, like when I was growing up, right? Being a geek and being into fantasy and Star Wars and video games, like it wasn't cool, right?
Yeah.
Like today's geeks, like they owe us a debt. Like the the head of the chess club is dating a cheerleader. Like you owe me because when I was growing up, man, it was not cool.
Yeah, if you were in the Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah,
everybody watches Stranger Things, and they see these
yes,
kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, like, oh, that must have been so cool back then. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We
yeah,
were the kids that got beat up. All right,
right,
so
right, exactly.
we were the kids that like got egged on the way home from school because we were the geeks and stuff like that.
Yes,
And now all of a sudden, it's like Comic Con's like the coolest thing in the world. Like
right,
you had to be like, you couldn't let people know you were into Lord of the Rings. It wasn't
right.
cool to be into Lord of the Rings in the 80s and 90s, early 90s.
Yeah,
Maybe in some places it was, but in small town Pryor, Oklahoma, where there are more cattle than there are people, it was not cool. All right.
hey, same thing
So
on the coast of same thing on the coast of South Carolina, man. It was not cool.
yeah. But yeah, we would go to Starbase 21. There was a comic book shop that was well known in Tulsa, Oklahoma, called Starbase 21, and we would go to that comic book shop, and that's where they had fantasy and sci-fi books, tons of comics, all sorts of collectibles and things like that. And they had a bunch of
Yeah.
arcade games in the back. So that's where I would learn to like play Street Fighter and things like that. My dad would go off to the side and look for his like sci-fi and post-apocalyptic novels because those were popular in the 80s because we were still in the Cold War and things like that. And so he would go off and do that, and I go in the back with like 5 quarters and play the games and stuff like that. So, um, but yeah, video games I think is really what kind of got me into storytelling and understanding the story and things like that. But I think if we go back and let's kind of you talked about Star Wars earlier. What are some of the because I'm a huge Star Wars kid. You get your hat on. I have like 90 Star Wars extended universe novels behind me.
Yep. I love the
And
extended universe.
yeah, and you know I have this thing. I think it's a sin to call them legends.
Yeah.
That's how I grew up. So what were some of the Star Wars games, that you really got into that were some of your favorites?
Yeah, well, of course, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, as I mentioned, and
Yeah.
of course um, that was huge. And then I got into the Dark Forces game, which was Dark Forces was the original Rogue One. Like the whole story of that game was you're stealing the planes of the Death Star,
Right.
and then you had Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, which was
Oh.
really the first game that capture the feeling of being a Jedi. Like they got the
Mm.
lightsaber combat right, and it was in the time of Quake, so it had a really fun PvP mode. That's back when I could actually do PvP and actually be halfway decent at it these days. The I hate to break it to you guys, as you get a little older, the reaction times do slow down just a little bit. So I uh, I can remember I was in doing Unreal Tournament one time, or was it Overwatch, and um, I just was getting destroyed, and these kids sounded like they were like 12 years old on the mics, and they were like just giving me the business, right? And I'm like, look, guys, I would have destroyed you in Unreal Tournament. You would have been toddlers, but I would have destroyed you. But
See,
yeah,
there was what was it? Shadows of the Empire.
oh
Is
yeah,
That was one that
love that book.
they launched the book and the game right
Yep.
around. It was like a coordinated thing. And I
Yeah.
think that was when I started realizing, and I can't remember what year that was, but yeah, Steve Perry wrote the book, and it's set right between Empire Strikes Back
Yep.
and Return of the Jedi, and they're
Yep.
basically Luke and Leia are looking for where is Han? You know,
Right. Right.
where does Boba Fett have him? Because they don't
Right.
they know he's not on Tatooine, and so but the video game follows the same quest as well, and you're
Yeah.
dealing with the Black Sun, which is that secret
Yes.
organization and stuff like that. So uh, that to me,
And
when they
Caesar.
launch, yeah, yeah, when they launched both the book and the game at the same time, that was where I was like, oh, that's cool
Hmm.
because you're getting the story in two different formats, but the video game portion of the story you can explore even further. So, did you ever play that one, Shadows of the Empire?
I read that book at least three times. I really really enjoyed the book.
Oh,
Let's see. I'm trying to remember if that was which system that came out on because I was mostly doing PC gaming.
I can't remember.
So if it was on PC, I probably did at least play it for a little while. Um, but I don't recall right off. I know there were definitely some differences because when I did play it, I remember like, wait, this is different than the book. So clearly the two development teams were talking, but not like in lockstep with the
Yeah,
storyboards and stuff. Because there are a couple things that are slightly different in the movie, I mean not movie, in the game than versus in the book. But yeah, loved Shadows of the Empire. I keep hoping like they'll they keep bringing back Legends characters in the
yeah.
live action. I'm hoping we'll get a Black Sun or a Prince Caesar
Oh,
cameo or something.
you know, we can only hope. I think Battlefront was another one where they did both the book
Yeah,
and the game. And I think there was like two games that came out, and I think there was two books that came out as well.
yeah.
Um,
The second Battlefront actually had a really interesting story with Iden Verso
mm,
and the kind of covert. She starts out as on Endor in the aftermath, and it's and Luke actually shows up in that story. He has an interaction, well, with her, but with one of the Imperials. It's one of the better, the Imperial defector story has been done so many times, but the Battlefront 2 actually I thought did a pretty good job with it.
yeah. So, have you seen the new Darth Maul uh, trailer?
Yeah, Darth Maul Shadow Lord. That's
Yeah.
something. I mean, I kind of looked at the trailer, but that's not a character that I'm particularly interested in
Mm,
getting more of their story. I know he's very popular and it's awesome for people who are into Darth Maul, but it's just not a story that gets me excited. Like I'm kind of done with dark sider stories and exploring the dark side. Like I'm much more interested in stories of light and light overcoming darkness and good
yeah.
overcoming evil. And you know, I love stories right now that I see in earlier Star Wars where you see a theme of the real overcoming the artificial. Like
Mm.
I know the Ewoks, people have their opinion about the Ewoks, but it really is this thing about this very natural, nature-based, real kind of thing overcoming this artificial, mechanized empire. And I right now with just where we are in the world and in culture, that story is something that resonates with me.
You know, I kind of agree because I just read Darth Maul Shadow Hunter, and one of the things I noticed about it is it was really as and you get viewpoints of Darth Maul throughout the story, but the way it ended was very much Darth Maul winning, and I didn't like that because this is pre Phantom Menace, um, and it's a good book. I enjoyed the book.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you think of Star Wars, and there are those Star Wars books that are the he the horror type stories. I think the same guy that did Darth Maul Lockdown. I'm drawing the blank on his name. Joe Schreiber, something like that. He
Okay.
also did Death Troopers, which was like you know
Mm.
zombies in space. You know,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
stormtroopers who become zombies, and
Yeah.
I
Kind
can't
of inspired
remember.
Ahsoka.
Yeah, and so he did three or four different books. He's actually a horror writer, but I
Not
think
correct.
you know, I don't personally. I don't talk politics online. I don't talk culture wars online. That's a personal rule of mine. But
Yeah.
I do agree that when you look at the state of the world right now, regardless of where you come down politically on issues, I think that stories of hope, stories of light, stories of just normal everyday people doing things and uh, becoming heroic. I think in a way is what the world needs now, which is why I really enjoyed Mando,
Mm,
Mandalorian. You know, those first that
yeah.
first season, the second season, um, third season was okay. I'm not down on the third season like everybody else is, but that first season, I think, especially just this guy, was a bounty hunter, just sort of doing the right thing in the moment,
Yeah.
to protecting the child and things like that. Sometimes I think when we think of heroic stories, we think that heroic stories need to always be saving the galaxy. And
Hmm.
I think that's why cozy fantasy is taken off, and you see guys like ZS Diamante taking off with Garden to Garden and things like that, because I think sometimes we just need the low stakes heroic stories that are
Hmm.
cool. And I thought that first season of Mando was sort of, in a way, it's not like he's saving the galaxies. I felt like the stakes were important, but they weren't like, hey, we gotta blow up a Death Star or anything like that. It was
Right.
a different type of stakes for Star Wars. I'd say it was low stakes for Star Wars. Others may disagree. I don't know. To me, that scratched all the right itch. And I know we've kind of transitioned out of video gaming, but did you see
Hmm.
the new trailer, the Mando versus and Grogu trailer?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I definitely saw the new trailer. That looks like I will definitely be there opening day. 100%. Yeah. I mean it looks kind of like it almost well, I guess the trailer could almost be interpreted as like, there's some Imperial stuff going on, but we're definitely going to get into the Hut world. Like it looks like we're going to Nar Shaddaa, maybe Nar Shaddaa and Nal Hutta, which
Yeah,
if Nar Shaddaa, Nal Hutta is the home world of the Huts, which is like Jabba the Hutt, but Nar Shaddaa is the smuggler's moon. It's a moon of Nal Hutta, and it's like Vegas in space, man. It's like anything goes, and it's a Hut controlled space. So it's just anything. But it's a very where Nal Hutta is like this almost chemical wasteland, like they've just really destroyed the planet. Um, Nar Shaddaa is more this almost mini Coruscant, very, the whole moon's pretty much techno and covered in buildings and whatnot. So it looks like
yeah,
we're going to go to both of those. And
yeah. I think we're gonna explore it just a little bit more. Lucasfilm obviously has changed leadership, new
yep.
leadership. If you could say, okay, hey, if you could, let me ask you this:
Hmm.
as a Star Wars fan, if you could write a Star Wars novel, they just said, hey, where do you want to set it at? And they gave you a blank slate and said, write the book. Where would you set it, and what characters would you focus on? Would you focus on like totally new characters, or would you like draw some characters from both Legends and maybe even canon itself? So
So I think what I would probably do is it would definitely be a Jedi centric story. Um, and I would want to kind of explore the original Sith, the race, more
mm,
so than what the Sith became. Like I always had this idea about a cryo ship of the original Sith um, being discovered, and then the Jedi having to rally um, to come and fix that problem. My big issue with like if it would depend on how much freedom I was really given. Like if I could do, I'd love to do like a what if kind of
mm,
thing. Like what if if they would let me do it, like, okay, well, what if Anakin didn't fall? Or not didn't fall. What if Anakin turned on Sidious in that moment and instead of joining him, put a lightsaber through him? what's the galaxy look like? And I actually think you still wind up with a galactic civil war later on because I think the Jedi still schism. I just think it does it in a slightly different way. But that would be a lot of fun to write if I had the ability to do a kind of a what if story
Mhm.
of Anakin, not falling or um, if we could my I really wish we had the ability to kind of, and I know they won't do this, but almost split the timeline because in this kind of new Republic era with Mando and the other shows that they're setting up, they're creating all these interesting characters that because of the real world timeline of when these shows and movies were produced, none of them show up in the sequel trilogy because well we didn't know they were going to exist. Clearly, Grogu would be alive in the sequel trilogy. So I almost wish they could split the timeline and continue on with these characters rather than knowing everything has to kind of dovetail back into 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, I think I'd do something on the Outer Rim with characters that
Outbound Flight.
yeah, it's sort of like Outbound Flight, yeah, with characters and just, explore how the collapse of the Empire, affected them,
Yeah,
I think it's interesting because not everybody was a fan of the Jedi.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, in the Outer Rim, some people just did not like the Jedi, and they feared the Jedi, and
yeah.
I would like to explore some of the mistakes the Jedi made, that caused those reputations, um, to sort of develop as well. But I'd like to go back. Like, I remember reading Dawn of the Jedi, by Tim Levin, I think it was one of the very first in the Legends extended universe timeline over here. The very very
Mhm.
beginning. I think it's like the first book, in the timeline on the extended universe, and I'm like, man, there's so much more they could do in that earlier timeline. So anyway, all right, Ted. Hey, it's been great talking to you, man. I always enjoy talking to you. We've done if you go back on Spotify, Ted and I have done a ton of episodes. I think we did one on Kenobi one time,
Yep, yep.
when it came out. If you go back to the Geeky Dads talk about geeky things on Spotify, we did one on our top 5 candy bars. I remember that.
That was fun.
Yeah, we did. We talked about our top 5 candy bars. So, all the archive episodes, all 48 of those original episodes are out there on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. And so, hey, appreciate you coming on. Ted is the guy that keeps me sane. He works behind the scenes. At Realm Makers, he is the guy that's keeping our website from crashing whenever everything falls apart, and I absolutely depend on him. We were chatting last night with Scott Miner on the Expo site and getting that all
Yep.
squared away. And so, anyway, thanks for joining. Appreciate it. The shout out there, Andrew. Andrew Schwergen is going to be coming on the show. I'm trying to get him on. He's he's got a book to edit real quick, so he'll be coming on sometime in May. And I actually have a beta reads I owe back to Descendant, this week, so I need to get to work on those too. So
I just
eh,
finished a beta read
you
of a
did.
really interesting book that I wish I could talk about more because it's a
Oh,
lot of fun to
yeah.
read.
But of course, we have Alicia over here. She is a Descendant Publishing author as well, and she's got a book coming out with them. So everybody go follow her and check out her book that's coming out with them. Um, and I like what Troy and Stacy are doing with Descendant and Path to Portals,
Yeah,
which is everybody asks me. I've had success as an indie, and you learn who the trust in the publishing industry. Let me put it that way. And so yeah. So anyway, all right, we're gonna sign off here, everybody. We'll talk to you later. If you listen on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen at, thank you for joining us, and we will catch you all in a couple weeks. See ya.